Hey guys, it's Rod Loverman. So I heard something crazy in the news, and immediately I felt like I needed to say something because I have a lot of knowledge in this area, and especially now that I can look at it from a Christian perspective, I feel like it definitely needed to be covered. So I'm making this video in a reaction to Texas state legislation pushing to make THC illegal in Texas. I am very passionate about this topic due to my experience in the matter and my love for the upcoming generation. I would have more than likely made a similar video if Texas had decided to legalize weed. I'll attempt not to be biased, but rather give people to see the morality of the situation in the biblical perspective. God loves all of his children, and this is very important. Something I didn't say in my testimony video is that I'm a sergeant of correctional officers for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ. I've had an extensive history with drugs, personally, and this is one of my defining differences between my old self and my new self. If you don't know what I'm talking about, listen to this verse. Romans 6:6. For we know that our old self was crucified with him, so that the body ruled by sin might be rendered powerless, so that we may no longer be enslaved to sin, since a person has died, is free from sin. So I've died with Jesus on the cross. I'm now in my new self. I do not condone any of the actions of my past. They were wrong, and they kept me from God for years. Before I really get into the message, here's a passage that I needed to know most of my adult life, and I either I didn't know it or I just didn't want to remember it, but it's very important because it might have convicted me to start my journey with God earlier instead of me being rebellious so much of my young adult life. Romans 13:1 and 2. Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. Here's what's going down in Texas. All THC is being banned. Not CBD. They say they're banning the high. In 2019, a law was instituted that products could contain up to 0.03% of Delta-9. That's the chemical that the U.S. Made illegal in 1970. So 0.03% in itself is very little, but usually these companies would use Delta-8 or THCA, etc. as additives. These still got you high. It just wasn't exactly the same thing. Due to this law, many businesses and stores began to open, basically in preparation for the day that Texas made Delta-9 legal. So they would have dispensaries operations from the get-go. Many of these shops even sell actual buds like you would see in a dispensary, but they're specific strains that don't contain more than 0.03% of Delta-9. Because of the openness of this law from 2019, it has made it more accessible for minors. Basically in the same way that alcohol is. Kids using fake IDs and kids asking irresponsible adults, etc. Stuff like that. So what basically happened is too many people were using the lenience of the 0.03% law to slip through the cracks and weren't being honest in their production. So rather than getting involved in the regulation of these products, the Texas government decided to make all forms of THC illegal. What the government fails to see is that accessible and easy are not one and the same. THC becomes illegal. When THC becomes illegal, people will be going back to drug dealers, which many people 25 and older that still use cannabis do go to these illegal sources because the quality is better. But kids under the age of 25, which the law is claiming to protect, are used to getting these products from these accessible options and will now be going to illegal sources with which they may have never previously had contact with. I've personally had to deal with many people who sold illegal drugs in the past. As you can imagine, many of them were untrustworthy, especially the ones around my age. I was introduced to psychedelics, downers, uppers, many of which I tried because in my mind I was already putting myself at risk buying weed illegally. This is where the idea comes into play of that weed is a gateway drug. Because if people's only source of cannabis is from a smoke shop, they're not going to be subjected to other types of drugs like you would at a drug dealer's house. At age 18 or 19, I almost submitted to peer pressure and did meth. Thank God I did not go down that road. And at one point, one of the dealers pulled a gun on my little brother and accused him of stealing from him. This is what we'll be subjecting young people to. And it's not more difficult, just way more dangerous. Fentanyl is also much more prevalent than it was in the past. It's easily added to drugs to make them stronger, and it's cheaper for the supplier. Government regulations are corrupt as well, but it has much more checks and balances than these illegal street vendors. This law, when it's enacted, will make possession of THC a Class A misdemeanor, with penalties up to a year in jail. Manufacturing, and I assume growing, these products with THC will be considered a third-degree felony, which could result in 2 to 10 years of prison time. So, working in Texas prison system, I don't know a lot about the state jail side of things, but currently the population is growing more rapidly than ever. TDCJ is already trying to fix housing areas so that they can fit more inmates. This law is sure to add a huge influx of inmates on a scale I can't possibly comprehend. It makes me wonder how far ahead the politicians have looked into this aspect. So I've heard many advocates for cannabis use this verse to justify it in the face of its legal status. Genesis 1:29. God also said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the surface of the entire earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed. This will be food for you." So, what are the effects of cannabis? So, some good things, and these are things that you find on the internet. These are the good things, the good health benefits. It helps with sleep. It helps with anxiety. It helps with eating disorders. It helps with nausea whenever you're in the midst of going through chemo. It helps with seizures from epilepsy. And some of the things that I would have said whenever I was using it is that it felt good. Music was better. TV was better. I felt more creative. I suppressed unwanted emotions, which all these things, looking back on it right now, it's like everything that feels good to you is not good for you. I understand that. And letting yourself enjoy these things and then cutting yourself off is going to make you feel the negative effects of this. So what are some bad things that cannabis can cause? Decrease in motor skills, makes it much more dangerous to drive. Addiction. As much as people want to say that weed's not addicting, they're liars. It's harder to learn and to focus. Very bad for students, for young people, especially before they're 25. They're soaking up stuff. That's the age where you're able to learn the most. It causes depression. I was severely depressed whenever I was on weed. And it gives you weakened impulse control, which actually feeds back into that addiction. So even if you haven't tried it before, you can tell why the love and hate for cannabis is so polarizing. Before, when I used it all the time, I would throw out excuses like, well, that's a healthy alternative to the over-the-counter drugs, etc. Which in itself isn't wrong, but I personally smoked it, which is not healthy. And besides the side effects inflicted on me from the chronic use, pun intended, I was actually pretty healthy. So I didn't actually need it. The only reason I used it was for recreational purpose, turned addiction, which caused most of the decisions that I made to revolve around it. My next point is history repeats itself. Remember the alcohol prohibition? Prohibition started due to a temperance movement. And so I looked up the definition of temperance. And the definition of temperance is moderation or self-restraint in action, statement, etc., self-control. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can anyone besides Jesus Christ himself give another person self-control? It's called self-control. One thing I've learned in prison is that you cannot make another person do something. They have to submit. It's in our very nature. God gave us free will. You cannot force somebody to do something unless you physically just grab them and manipulate their body, but that's not them doing it. You understand? You can't make somebody do something. So similarly, if the government makes THC illegal, the citizens will still have to make the conscious decision to abide by the law. It's not stopping anybody by making it a law. Assuming everybody's good, law-abiding citizens, yes, it will. During the Prohibition, the crime rate skyrocketed. Gang activity and organized crime was worse than ever. Think about Al Capone. Texas is already struggling with gang activity. Human trafficking and drug smuggling is extremely bad right now, especially since so much of the U.S. and the Mexican border is part of Texas. Enacting this law will make the demand for drugs increase even more. More demand, more money, more power for the gangs. Just because a law is enacted doesn't mean it can be properly enforced. We're already low on manpower and law enforcement everywhere. And the war on drugs is already a losing battle. Like I mentioned earlier, the prohibition didn't stop people from drinking. It just created bootlegging, which caused thousands of deaths and crippled over 100,000 people. Growing cannabis would be one thing, but if the stakes are just as high for growing as they are for containing the chemical of THC itself, why wouldn't people gravitate towards vapes and gummies, which could easily pass as just candy or just nicotine? These vapes that street vendors will have and claim to have THC can have any number of chemical compounds. There's no regulation, no standard. Before this law of the 0.03%, there was an epidemic of drugs like K2 that were being sold in smoke shops and convenience stores. If you don't know what K2 is, it's a chemical that causes elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, unconsciousness, tremors, seizures, vomiting, hallucinations, agitation, anxiety, pallor, numbness, and in bad cases, death. As horrible as it sounds, it is. I've done it. What's worse is it's addicting, and many baseline tests will not detect it. Though many different strains have been made illegal, there are new variations created every day that are just as bad. And besides, what it does to you physically, while on it, you're so mentally out of it that you can cause a lot more harm to yourself and others. Because of its low traceability, this is a huge problem in prisons. I've heard of people jumping off of 2 or 3-story tiers, starting fights, etc. I actually saw an inmate smoking it, and then, unable to control his actions, he fell backwards and busted his head open on a solid stone wall. So assuming people don't go to drug dealers and possibly be poisoned by fentanyl, they could easily be poisoned by a flashy new legal drug. So what is the real reason the state is making THC illegal? They say it's to make it less accessible to children, which is very admirable. However, you know my opinion. You now know my opinion. While we can't be 100% sure what the motives of these that are pushing the legislation, we can be 100% sure about our intentions and our motives. Proverbs 21:2-3 says, "All a person's way seems right to him, but the Lord weighs hearts. Doing what is righteous and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." He is the ultimate judge. I know I say it a lot, but I mean it. Go to him. Read his word, pray to him, if you want to make sure what you're doing is right. That little nagging voice you feel when something isn't quite right, that's God pulling on your heartstrings. It's obviously something important. Proverbs 10:24 says, "What the wicked dreads will come to him, but what the righteous desire will be given to him." Would you rather sit in the dark with a nagging feeling in your gut, waiting for destruction, or would you rather question that feeling and ask God, the creator of everything, who knows all, knows you better than yourself, and is omnipresent, knowing everything going on from every angle, to shed some insight? From a spiritual perspective, I don't want to say with absolute certainty whether Christians should or should not use cannabis. Like anything else, I believe you should go to God if it's important to you. For me personally, using cannabis is wrong. God told me specifically not to. This is the moment I referenced in my testimony. If you haven't seen it, here's the rundown. I had already been working at the prison for a year or two. And of course, we take random drug tests. I knew it was wrong, but I still smoked some weed. While driving home, I was very high. I began to pray to God and began wondering deeply, is Jesus actually 100% God? Like he was 100% man? At that moment, since my heart was sincerely wondering and searching for truth, God allowed me to see Jesus in all of his glory. I then knew that it was wicked to continue getting high at the expense of the path that God had chosen for me. Even though I had this revelation and I understood God's love for me, he gave his only son to die for me, even though I sinned against him, even though I had the nerve to question if his son was actually real. Even though I knew this, it hadn't stopped me from slipping up a few times and using cannabis. The devil tempted me like he did Eve in the Garden of Eden. Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden?" Satan kept telling me I probably just misunderstood what God told me. I don't want to disobey God anymore. I know that it hurts him more than I can ever comprehend. John 14:21, Jesus says, "The one who has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. And the one who loves me will be loved by my Father. I also will love him, and I will reveal myself to him." So is it okay for you to smoke or to use cannabis? Do you need it? What does the Bible say? 1 Corinthians 6:9-10 says, "Don't you know that the unrighteous will not inherit God's kingdom? Do not be deceived. No sexually immoral people, idolaters, adulterers, or males who have sex with males, no thieves, greedy people, drunkards, verbally abusive people, or swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." Nowhere in this passage does it say anything about people that get high. However, I think it has similarities of drunkenness because you are mentally impaired and intoxicated when you're high. Now, I do understand that drinking casually and being a drunkard are very different. But I have a question for those who have partaken in cannabis and or alcohol. Have you ever been drunk on one beer? Have you ever been high from one hit? I personally have never been drunk on one beer. Yet on more than one occasion, I've been high with just one hit. My point isn't to judge anyone, but to help them understand this next point. The things in the passage from Corinthians are about the identities that people choose to adopt. For example, I used to be a stoner. That is the identity that I had accepted. Weed was my idol that I made all my decisions through. Now, I identify as an adopted child of God. I've been given an actual purpose in life. My purpose is fulfilled when I share God's love with people and show them the love that He has for all of us. What do you identify as? In conclusion, I have many mixed feelings about cannabis. I think it's best to think it is a gift from God, which it is. It can help people that are sick feel better, and although I have conflicting feelings due to my abusive relationship with it, it also helps with people with stress to relax. The last thing God told me regarding weed was something like this. I put this on the earth for humans. This is not the time for you to use it. Whenever it is your main focus, which it had become at the time, it becomes a love for the creation instead of a love for the Creator. This is idolatry. This has been my personal experience with God. If you want confirmation about it yourself, please go to Him. With the way that cannabis can manipulate your mind, I know for a fact God would love to talk to you about it. And I'm sorry this was a bit long-winded, but it was very important. It is very important. If this affects you in any way, please reach out to me. If you're confused about anything, reach out to me. I'm not an expert, but most of the things I just told you are off the top of my head. The only thing that I really actually looked into was the law that will be to be enacted, which I think is a bit ridiculous, honestly. I personally think that a lot of the motives has to do with money, somehow or another, because that's usually what politics end in. But like I said, we're not to judge. We're to follow the laws of the land. And, if you really feel convicted, to know what God thinks about it, ask Him. That's the only way you're going to get the answer. Watching a bunch of videos about people saying, oh, you should smoke because of this, this, and this, or you shouldn't smoke because of this, this, and this, is a man's idea. It's a man's thoughts. My thoughts aren't any better than any other man, but I'm just another man. Jesus was not just another man. Jesus was a man that God put here, His Son. That man that all of us should be living an example of, lived a perfect life. He didn't struggle with, well, maybe I should do this. Maybe it's not against God. It doesn't say specifically this and that. No, his main focus was God. Listening to Him, going off of His words, not off of the things that popped up in his head. Well, maybe, this could happen. And maybe, whenever you start going down that path, you're going down the wrong path. I promise you. If you seriously feel convicted, if you feel stuck, if you feel any sort of way about something, don't just let it ruminate and roll around in your head. It's not going to go anywhere. That's called insanity. Talk to God. I love all of you, and sorry the quality of this video is pretty bad, but it was super important and I just wanted to get it out there to you guys. Love you guys. Talk to you later.